So, the backlash to the last model I made was quite a lot, to say the least. It seemed that killing the Onion Knight sparked a few strong emotions from a lot of people, and they let me know. Oh boy, did they let me know. Reddit tore me a new one. Point made, point heard. So, for all those worried about Onion Knight's safety, don't worry. I'm gonna make reparations in the next video, so hopefully that will win me back in favour with a few people. But we'll come to that in the next video. For this video, what I want to make is the greatest voice acting from an NPC in any From Software game against one of the coolest bosses in Elden Ring. We're gonna make Igon versus Bayle. On my Instagram page, Bayle vs Igon was one of the most requested dioramas to make ever since the Elden Ring DLC dropped. And it just so happened by the time I finished my last model, Realsteon had just uploaded a Bayle vs Igon STL to their Patreon. So I loaded those files onto the printer and set them off over the next couple of days to print and ready to start piecing together. Roughing up the connecting points helps give some extra grip and friction when gluing flat surfaces together, so I did that all over Bayle as he has lots of separate parts to work with. Then for any little noticeable connecting points or gaps, I'm just using some epoxy putty to smooth out and fill any points of contact. And I also have here a perfectly put together Igon that printed in one. I don't want a square base this time, I really want to have a circular base. So after using a professional carpentry tool, a plate, to mark a perfect circle, I can cut out a circular base with a jigsaw. Then, with these small remaining offcuts of XPS foam I have lying around, I'll start building up some ground shapes on the base and then get them all hot glued down. And I can use a sharp flat blade to cut around the edges, making it nice and flat.
It's not a good idea, is it? It's a better idea.
Now I can treat you to some calming foam cutting ASMR. With the base foam cut, I can take lots of little foam blocks and break them up into not so blocky rocks to start scattering them around and building up a jagged peak-esque rock formation on the base. I then realised that was a dumb idea to do first because what I really wanted to do with this diorama was have Bayle flying, so I bought this flying Warhammer stem to put on the base, but that means I now have to cut out a cross-shaped hole in the base and remove a bunch of the rocks that I've just glued down. Then fill it with some extra strength wood glue, shove the stem into place, then I can grab the rocks I cut off and use that to build up around the stem to hide any gaps and make it look a bit more flush. I'll take some gap filler to fill up gaps around the rocks, but also to put around the gaps of the flying stem so that it can support Bayle's big beefy bulges without buckling. And I'll pop a little magnet on top of the base that Bayle can attach to. To make the smooth rocks into roughy, rocky rocks, I'll take a real rock and ram it into the foam until either my wrist starts to ache or I just get bored. Now with the rocks rocked, I'll take some vanilla ice cream flavoured gravel and sprinkle them onto a glue covered base, which should hopefully give the whole thing a bit more of a natural feel. We have the bigger boulders and rock formations with the foam bits, but the smaller gravel will give us some size variation, and because they are actually real rocks, they'll definitely look like real rocks. I'll give a watered down PVA glue spritz over the base to make sure everything gets locked into place. So a long time ago during the pandemic, before I even started doing any hobby painting of any kind, my biggest passion at the time, and for the majority of my life, has been music and music production. During the pandemic, I downloaded Logic and I used to make all kinds of beats. Once I started doing hobby painting, that took over. So what I wanted to do with this model was kind of incorporate both of the things that I love doing, making models, making music. So what I've done is possibly the stupidest thing I think I've put together. I have taken Igon's speech from Elden Ring, the classic "Curse you Bayle, you big bitch," and picked 3 different genres of music that I can remix his speech into to create 3 different Igon tracks. If there was time permitting, I would have made my own beats to go with this, but I wanted to get this out quickly, so I picked some royalty-free tracks that I've remixed together. So the first one that I did was a house track. I've taken the original track, chopped it up a bit, and then put in Igon's speech. And with that, I popped on a bunch of different equalizers and tone shifting and pitch correction, compressors, reverb, everything to try and make it fit the track a bit better. And designed this.
Curse you, Bayle! I hereby vow you will rue this day, day, day. You will rue this day, day, day. But I will riddle with holes your rotten hide, Curse you, Bayle!
And that was the first one that I did, which was pretty ridiculous. The second one that I did, which I think is my favourite one. So I tried to find a track that sounded a little bit like Disturbed, because I thought that his kind of gruff, growly, distorted voice kind of fits in well with that genre. Same application with the house beat to make it fit the metal genre, and came up with this.
Curse you, Bayle! Solid of scale you might be, foul dragon. Behold, a true Drake warrior, and but I will riddle with holes your rotten hide. The hail of harpoons!
My favourite by far, and the third and final one, is from a genre of music that I didn't know what the name was, but it's yacht rock, which is that kind of like funky, loungy kind of rock. And I just had this idea that I could really play with Igon's pitch and tone and really try and match it to fit like a vocal harmony. It's like quite sassy.
Curse you, Bayle! I hereby vow you will rue this day. Behold, a true Drake warrior, and Igon. I hereby vow you will rue this day.
So why have I done this? Good question. Well, what I initially wanted to do was to put Igon's speech into the model. So what I have here is a very flat speaker, and that speaker plugs into a sound card. And then this sound card has 4 buttons, and if you press each button, it will play a different track. I can download and transfer all these different tracks onto the sound card and have each one play when you push a button on the model. Okay, so I have transferred it to the sound card, and if I press one of these 4 buttons, it should play. Let's test the metal. Let's try the yacht rock, I think. That's the house one. And I can turn it up a bit. Yacht rock on number 3. It's just coming out of this tiny little speaker here. And just for the sake of anything, let's play the first one. Whoa. That's insanely loud. Well, there we go. I feel like I'll probably have to readjust the volume of that one because, woo, that came off strong. And we could put that in the model. That is utterly hilarious. So with our little sound card loaded up, I need to get it stuck into the bass, which yet again, I'm gonna have to cut back into. It would make my life much easier if I just thought about what I'm doing ahead of time, but I'm here to do and not to learn.
I was elected to lead, not to read.
With the holes cut out of the base, I can get the sound card, speaker and battery pack slipped into place and glued down, making sure the speaker is central and more importantly facing the right way up. And all I gotta do to get the base finished before painting is take some more little foam rocks and start covering up as much of the battery pack and speaker as possible so they don't look so obvious and prominent. So I have here a finished base, rigged up with sound, ready to go to get Bayle and Igon put onto it. You kind of see the shape of everything that I'm going for, with that kind of like ridged, raised, jagged rock at the end there, quite similar to how the jagged peaks look in the DLC. But most importantly, the sound works, and I'm so happy that I did this because oh shit. Got to switch it on first. And I'm so happy because it just adds so much to it. This has actually weirdly been stuck in my head for the past few days. I hereby drink. If it was just the model itself, that would be cool, but this is excellent. All I've got left to do is just paint it, and then I can get Bayle and Igon added in, and we have a whole musical Igon versus Bayle diorama. To begin painting, I've got to take my Mod Podge and black paint recipe, the black paint to prime the whole thing and get it looking cohesive and flat, and the Mod Podge will seal and protect the foam from any paint. Fortunately, the speaker is black, so even if I got paint onto it, you probably would never see it, but if I were smarter and better at what I do, I would definitely put tape over the whole thing so that it wouldn't get any paint on it. Now, with everything all blacked up and looking pretty uniform, I'll get a pass of mid-grey splashed over the rocks. Now everything is suitably grey, we can dash over a lighter coat with a dry brush of lighter grey using this old makeup brush. To start adding some natural rock colours onto it, I'm going to start with a very watered down dark umber tone. I'll mix some black into the umber tone to get a very dark brown, and I'll use that as a wash to bring some of the umber tones down a bit. Umber and ochre seem to be the best combo when adding natural tones to rocks, so that's usually my go-to duo. I'll do a pass of black wash over it to bring the brightness down a tad. Just give some dabs with some kitchen roll over everything so that you don't get any unnecessary pooling and build-ups on the rocks. To finish off the base build, I'll do some decorating, starting with a nice selection of Games Workshop skulls, and I'll prime my little selection with some bone tone basing, and we can start dotting them around the base. For this bit, all you need to do is just take a little protein scoop of death and start placing that around wherever kinda you want to put them. I have no real rhyme or reason other than just what fits where and what I can be bothered to fit in. With all the skulls scattered around the base, I'll take some bone tone contrast paint to slap onto all of them to give them a bit of contrast, and it also gives them a bit more of a weathered bone look, rather than just a flat beige base. One final bit of the base will be to throw on some of these red flowers, which I found are growing around Bayle's area. They are self-adhesive clumps of flowers, so I just need to get them slapped around into all the sort of cracks and nooks and crannies with some tweezers, because they are well too fiddly to place around with big dumb fingers. So there's our finished base, and it's looking pretty cool. And it's just about ready to have Igon and Bayle mounted on it. I primed Igon with a bone tone because I want to use a bunch of contrast paints to base him, and priming black makes contrast tones significantly harder to use. I used some leather contrast paints to splash over his hat, his gloves, his belt, all of his accessories, and all the random gloves that he has strapped to his body. His cloak seems to be a greying purpley kind of tone, so if I can bring a bit more colour to a model that always seems so monochrome and dark, I'm gonna do that. His great bow is made of dragon bones, so that will get another basing of bone tone. His face is covered in leather wraps, I think, so I'll wax some dark brown on that and give the arrow some woodish bone tone as well. For his skin, I want to give him some nice burnt colour since Bayle really fucks him up, and I'll do that by basing it with a dark burnt red tone. We'll do a basic NMM on his chestplate armour, so I'll just start by basing it with some dark grey. For his skin on his legs, I'll start working up from the dark red that we have and work in some dark burnt pinky tones for the shadow parts, and I'll slowly move up through the Caucasian flesh tones to build up the midpoints all the way to the bright fleshy highlight points. The parts like his kneecaps and central points of the shin and thigh are where I'm building up the highlight points. I'm doing the same kind of method for the armor, taking progressively lighter tones of grey, just taking the bright points that would be hitting the center of the round armor plate and falling off to darker colors around the edges and sides of it. To emphasize the contrast, I'll tuck some darker, blacker shades into the little dips of the armor, and you can bring out any sort of edge highlighting to really add that extra shine effect. And to finish off the body of Igon, I'll add some varying highlights and shadows to his hat, cloak and arrow to give some extra variation and depth, making sure the higher points are getting more highlights and the deeper recesses are getting more mid to dark tones to bring in that contrast and make it all a bit less flat. The last step to finish off Igon is to get the great bow done. For this, it's following a similar kind of method as to what's been done before for Igon. I'll take some of the different shades of bone tone and following the shape of the bow, all the little ridges and twists will help map out where I want to build up the mid-tones to the highlights. Each brighter layer I add in, I just keep making them smaller and more centralized into the previous layer, which should build up to an almost off-white color. Finally, onto the bow. It has some tinting of red around the edges and in between the ropes tied around it, so I'll take a very thin glaze of red and just start building up layers onto the bow until I get a very faint but noticeable shade of red into the corners. And there we have a finished little lunatic, which means we can finish off the video by painting the great big bastard himself, Bayle. Big shout out to Realsteon once again for how good they got Bayle looking here. Now, he is a very dark dragon, as are most of FromSoft's dragons, so I primed him black and will begin by painting his wings, and I'll start by doing an airbrush highlight onto it with some white ink, targeting the central point and raised areas. Once whited up, I'll cover over the wings with a pass of ruby red ink, then another layer of white into the central points of the red, which will then be coloured with a vibrant orange tone to start building up that fiery aesthetic. With the orange in place, I'm going to go back over with some central points of white and then finish off the centres with a blasting of this medium yellow ink. Now, what I want to do with the wings is have some lightning crackling down them as if he was in phase 2, so I'll take a very thin brush with a fine pointed tip and draw out some jagged freehand lines and try and replicate how lightning forms. To start building up the lightning colours and brightness and glowing effect, I'll take some Lamian medium and some orange acrylic to create a very fine glaze and slowly build that up over the white strokes to generate a bit of a faint glow. Then I'm going back over the centres of the lightning cracks with some white so I can build up further brighter colours on top of it. The next colour being a flash glitz yellow just to try and sell that fiery lightning look. But after leaving that for a day and coming back, I wasn't overly happy with how the glow attempt was looking, so I took my airbrush out again and I decided to lower the PSI from like 30-ish down to about 20 so it had more of a jittered, splattery consistency, and then followed up with the same vibrant orange tone that we've done, and then a pass of thinned down yellow. Finally, I went back to the points of contact in the electricity with some white to hopefully finally sell the glowing effect. His scales are quite dark, so I stuck to some dark brassy tones and used dry brushing to go over him as the scaly texture lends itself quite well to dry brushing. Then colour in his pointy nubs all over his back and his tail with some more bone tone. His broken wing nub and teeth will also get a tickling of bone tone, his tongue a tongue tone, and his eyes a big bright red. Then I can just start bringing in the highlights by edge highlighting his horns and then bringing in brighter brown tones on all the raised ridges of his body. With the main part of the basing done, I can dry brush on even lighter and finer passes of browns to his scales without going too light and making him look way brighter than he actually is. Then all of his pointy nubs can have some browns dry brushed on towards the base and faded out towards the lighter bone tone at the tips. And I'll get his chopped leg based with some dark red, and then give a big wash of oily Agrax Earthshade over his body to bring those brighter tones down a bit and help blend the colours together. Let it settle into the textured scales and recesses for added depth and contrast. With the wash applied and dried, I'll give a final pass of brighter dry brushing to his nubs, and we can move on to the final part of Bayle, which is adding some of this lovely coagulated blood to all of his injuries. Starting with the leg stump and then finding all the little tears and rips and cuts in his skin to just fill up with a bit of this thick blood. Also, the wing breaks will get a bunch of blood added to it for that added bit of je ne sais quoi. And with all of that added in, they are done, and I'll get Bayle attached to his flying stem and pop Igon into place. You can pop that with your pants and socks, because that is top drawer. Now that's pretty much done, I think we can safely move on to the glamour shots.
Curse you, Bayle! I hereby vow you will rue this day. Behold, a true, straight warrior, and Igon. I hereby vow you will rue this day. Behold, a true, straight warrior, and Igon. Your fears made flesh. Someone of scale you might be, foul dragon. But I will riddle with holes your rotten hide, with a hail of harpoons, with every last drop of my being. Bayle the Dread.
Well, thanks so much for joining me in today's video. If you enjoyed it, please be sure to drop it a like, leave a comment, hit subscribe if you haven't already. Thank you so much to my lovely patrons for all the support on this channel. It does take me a bit longer these days to get my videos put together and edited around my real life work. So thanks for bearing with me, and I'll see you all in the next one.